Greetings, class, and welcome to the first lecture in Mentoring and Coaching for Leaders. These lectures are going to be heavily based on your textbook, Connecting by Clinton and Stanley. And in my opinion, their mentoring theory is probably the best out there because it gives a much broader perspective on mentoring. A lot of the stuff out there is program specific. It is for specific contexts. And what I found is that Clinton and Stanley's mentoring theory, which we are going to be focusing on in this class, actually allows for the broadest application of mentoring. And because of that, it actually is the most helpful for use in not only your personal life, but in training leaders in various types of contexts. I would even argue in cross-cultural contexts. So I think it's the best thing for us to focus on what they have, the work they've done on mentoring. All right, and so for these particular lectures, there'll be 3 lectures on mentoring, and we're going to cover, respectively, the importance of mentoring, the mentoring myths, and the definition of mentoring today in this first lecture. And then in lecture 2 and 3, we'll talk about the various types of mentors. We'll talk about the mentoring continuum and the mentoring constellation. So you want to go ahead and download and print this Mentoring Leaders Guide, which was created by Dr. Dennis Easter. As you're using it to take notes on these lectures, you can turn right around and use it as a resource to train others in your particular context. I want to start by saying that mentoring is about relationships, the relationships and the people God uses throughout our life to shape us. When you think about who you are today is due in part to the kinds of relationships that have shaped you. So when we talk about mentoring, we're talking about a certain kind of relational process that God uses to develop us. Mentoring is a critical factor in your development as a leader. It's where someone else had the resources and skills and knowledge that you needed at a particular time in your life. And apart from those relationships that bring those resources into your life, there really is little to no development. The growth you experience in any arena of life is often a direct result of having been mentored. And often you didn't know you were being mentored, but it was happening. So let me give you an example in my life. One of my early mentors, well, in my teenage years, played the saxophone, and he was a friend of mine who was incredible. His skill, his ability inspired me. The fact that he used it, for the glory of God in the local church settings, really inspired me. And for a while, he directly taught me, and it expanded not only my skill, but my desire to play. He was a mentor to me in that area. When I was in my early 20s, I can count several mentors who helped me prepare, watch this, for pastoral ministry that I wasn't even thinking of or desiring. I didn't want to be a pastor, but as I look back at things, these mentors in my life poured into me the necessary skills, mindsets that helped prepare me for pastoral ministry when it became clear that I was moving in that direction. So the point is that mentors, either directly or indirectly, enable and empower and inspire us in ways that expand our abilities, capabilities, and even provide opportunities that would not have been there otherwise. Ministry growth is no different in that it's largely the result of the personal growth that comes from mentoring relationships. So if you want to grow in your ministry, more often than not, it's connected to your personal growth. And that personal growth perhaps comes most effectively through mentoring relationships. Not only being mentored, but mentoring others. We'll talk about that in a different lecture. But the problem is we've often operated under a very limited perspective when it comes to mentoring. I've heard some of my students in the past bemoan the fact that they didn't have any mentors to guide or train them in ministry or in life. Or Perhaps they once had a mentor or two, but now they're pretty much on their own, left to figure things out. Now, one of the things that will happen, and the beauty of this class, the value of this class, is over these next 3 weeks, your understanding, appreciation, and application of mentoring is going to get a whole lot more broad. And you will begin to develop what we call mentoring eyes. And you're going to see mentoring relationships. You're going to be able to recognize mentoring when it's happening. You're going to see it from a much wider and more helpful perspective. So let's clarify what we mean when we talk about mentoring. The framework we want to locate our discussion on mentoring today has to do with a theory that Dr. Robert Clinton developed called leadership emergence theory. It's basically the topic of his seminal work, The Making of a Leader. In this particular work, perhaps the most astounding fact that Clinton discovered was that few leaders finish well. And according to his studies, about 30% or so. Every time I hear this fact, I always wonder, does anyone have an update on that statistic? Well, it was very insightful because it got us as leaders at the time really thinking about what it means to finish well and how can we prepare to do so. So for Clinton, he defines finishing well as being in love with Christ and being more like Christ at the end of your journey than you were at the beginning. It's also intentionally fulfilling all or part of your unique God-given destiny. And you're doing that at a high level. So you're contributing to the kingdom of God near the end of your journey at a very high level of realized potential. You're fulfilling your destiny, all or in part. And according to Clinton, he talks about the barriers to leaders finishing well. And some of these barriers would be things like finances, power, pride, sex, family, what he calls plateauing, which is you stop growing and stop learning and you kind of get stuck and you never get out. But on the opposite side of things, he also then identifies 5 characteristics of those who did finish well. Now, remember, Clinton had studied, up to date, he's probably studied several thousand leaders using the system he's developed, leadership emergence theory. And so the 5 characteristics that emerged out of this were, number 1, leaders who finished well had a lifetime perspective. They understood that God was shaping them over a lifetime. Leaders who finished well experienced repeated times of spiritual renewal, whether that was initiated directly by God or whether that was initiated by the leader themselves. It was important to experience regular renewal if you're going to finish well. Leaders who finished well established the practice, spiritual disciplines, practices that would help them continue to grow in their discipleship, in their following Jesus and becoming more like him. Leaders also who finished well maintained a learning posture. They were lifelong learners. They were never beyond learning something new. And then, of course, for our purposes, number 5 is leaders that finished well had really good mentors in their life throughout their lifetime. So mentoring relationships was a key to leaders finishing well. Now, the 3 questions of leadership development that come out of all of this, out of Clinton's theory, are this: where have I been? Like, how has God used people, events, and circumstances in the past to shape me? The second question is, where am I going? Based on what God has been doing in my past, what will it look like to make a kingdom contribution in this next chapter? What's my best understanding to date of my calling? Okay, so where have I been? Where am I going? And then the big mentoring question: who can help me get there? Right? That's the idea here, is that we are being more intentional about the mentoring process. So, being intentional about the mentoring process is critical to get you to where you know God wants you to be. Now, in order to do this, when it comes to mentoring, we need to first do away with some of the myths that may have limited our perspective when it comes to mentoring. So, let's talk about the mentoring myths. The first one is the one mentor myth. The one mentor myth says that there's only one person that can serve as a mentor for me in every facet of life and ministry. Okay, this is the sage on a stage model. I need to find my Yoda. I need to be the Padawan. Where is my master teacher, so to speak? And it's common for young leaders to attach themselves to one person, especially if that person is very dynamic and charismatic, right? And to kind of model their whole life after that person, right? It's the guru mentality. Now, the weakness of this model is that single model mentors not only tend to reproduce their skills and the good stuff in their life in other people, but they also tend to reproduce their sins. They're going to clone people, or you're going to become just like them for better or for worse. And what we're after really is for mentoring relationships to allow your uniqueness to emerge as a leader rather than just cloning you after another leader. You'll get the best out of mentoring when you have multiple quality mentors throughout your life. Okay, this reduces the risk of having tunnel vision. It will increase your productivity and ideas when the mentoring is coming from multiple sources. Guru mentoring is good early on in your development, but at some point you need to broaden and expand your mentoring relationships and diversify them. Okay, so the next mentor myth is the older mentor myth. This is that we tend to think that they can only mentor us if they are older than us, because older folks tend to have more wisdom and experience and skill and knowledge. Now, I know there may be some cultural dynamics to this where you just need to respect people who are older and, do whatever they tell you, take whatever they try to give you. But to say that age is a non-negotiable criteria for being a mentor, we are going to limit the kind of mentoring we can receive. Let me give you an example. If I wanted to improve in my fitness, more than likely, I'm 48 years old, but so more than likely, I'm going to go to a younger, more fit person to mentor me. If I wanted to get mentoring for how to use technology in today's age, then I'm probably going to go with the younger generation. Sorry, Gen X, I'm going to look for a millennial. I'm going to look for a Gen Z kid who this is just, what they grew up in. Right? So older mentors are valuable. Let's not deny that fact. But not all mentors need to be older than you. Okay, number 3, the not qualified myth, or the not qualified enough myth. This is the myth that says that the mentor themselves has to have their act together in every area of life in order to qualify to mentor you. I know some of you have high standards, but it is unrealistic to think that every mentor has to have a perfect record. We don't even require that of ourselves. Well, maybe some of us do, us perfectionistic folks, right? But the truth is, every mentor is qualified in a particular area of life to mentor you. All you really need to mentor someone in a particular area is to have more knowledge, more skill, and a willingness to share what you've learned in that area. The challenge will be to avoid their influence in the areas where they're not qualified to mentor you. And this requires some discernment on your part. You're going to have to say, well, okay, I need this from that mentor, but I don't need this. So you want to allow them to mentor you from their places of strength and not from their places of weakness. All right, so that's the not qualified enough myth. The fourth one is what we call the same gender myth. The same gender myth says I can only be mentored by the same gender. Now, we understand, especially in today's day and age, we understand the importance of gender issues with respect to power and respect and boundaries. We need to remain sensitive to these issues. Okay, but it would be foolish to think that we can only benefit from the same gender, because our mentoring experience is determined by our need. And sometimes what we need can be best addressed from the perspective and the experience of someone of the opposite gender. This is what I love about our Foursquare denomination, their commitment to empower women into ministry leadership, because there are some areas where it really is much more beneficial for us to receive the perspective and the wisdom of the opposite gender. Now, of course, we understand there are arenas of life where it's appropriate for the same gender to mentor you. Okay, but it's a myth to think that you cannot be mentored by the opposite gender. All right. The fifth mentoring myth is what we call the must agree myth, or the same theology myth. This myth says that the only people that can really speak into your life are the ones that already agree with you, or the ones with whom you already agree. Now, here's the problem with that. One of the features of effective mentoring involves not just telling you what you already know or want to hear. Effective mentoring challenges what you think you know in order to clarify and sharpen your understanding, either about what you know or perhaps to shift your perspective in a better, more healthy direction. So, effective mentoring is going to challenge what you know. If you just pick people that believe like you do, then you get encouragement and you get comfort and you get reaffirmed, but you don't get stretched. And when you're not being challenged or stretched, it's more than likely that you're not really growing. I remember when I went to seminary, I went to Fuller Seminary. And the thing I learned to love about going to a pretty much a Presbyterian rooted seminary was that I got to meet people from many different traditions of the Christian faith, as well as different cultures, people who had practiced their Christianity in cultures other than the one I grew up in. And it challenged and sharpened my own theological convictions, and it gave me much needed perspective and understanding. It forced me to mature. The last mentoring myth we'll talk about today is called the not needed myth. Now, there are two aspects to this myth. There's one side of it where you can hold this view of yourself, and you can think to yourself, you know what? I don't have a whole lot to offer, so I'm not needed to mentor other people. And of course, the truth is that you don't have to have everything you think you need in order to start mentoring others. Like I said earlier, you only need to be a step ahead in a particular arena to be qualified to mentor others. Like, you don't have to act like an expert, but you can mentor, you can be a mentoring guide to help others catch up to you. Okay, so that's the one aspect of that myth. The other aspect is just thinking in general that mentoring itself is not needed. And of course, that's just an illusion that, people are self-made and they don't really benefit from others. And we know the truth is you cannot become the best version of you all by yourself. You can't get there alone. You need wisdom. You need the experience. You need the influence of others in your life to grow. Okay. And obviously, to say this is to set yourself up to learn the hard way through lots of pain. Mentors can help you avoid a whole lot of unnecessary pain. Right? So let's do away with the not needed myth. If you'll allow me to do so here in the margin, I want you to write one more myth in. This is what I call the not available myth. The not available myth is that there are no mentors available. And I recently put this into play because I kept hearing some of my students say this. Listen, Based on this perspective on mentoring that we're teaching you, there are more mentors in your life than you realize. If you will change the way you think about mentoring, if you will change or shift your paradigm of mentoring, this class will help you do that. Mentoring needs to be seen as a series of functions rather than as a person. Leaders will need a series of mentors throughout their life who fulfill different functions in order to finish well. All right? Okay, so with all that, we're going to end with a definition of mentoring. Here is the working definition of mentoring that we're going to use in this class. Mentoring is a relational experience in which one person empowers another through sharing God-given resources. Now, notice the components here. It's a relationship between a mentor and a mentee. It's also this dynamic between the mentor and the mentee, where what's happening is they are enabling the mentee, or we could use the word empowering the mentee. So you've got to have a relationship for it to be mentoring, and there's got to be some kind of empowerment that happens in order for it to be called mentoring. And of course, the empowerment happens by the mentor sharing what they've been given. Now, what have they been given? And there's a list of that right here in your guide. They've been given wisdom from God, discernment, life and ministry experience, advice, new methods, new skills, or skills they've developed, principles, values, lessons. They've been given organizational influence, and they've been given financial resources. Okay, so in a mentoring relationship, the mentor pours into the mentee what they know or have been given by way of resources, and they pour this and invest it into the life of the mentee. That is the essence of mentoring. Let this definition shift your paradigm of mentoring. So mentoring and mentoring relationships are happening anytime you see that relationship, the relational experience, that empowerment through the sharing of God-given resources from one person to another person who needs it. All right? That will conclude lecture 1. See you next time.